And this morning, we are starting a new series because Landon has kicked off year 3 of Transforming 500 Lives with the focus on disconnected people. And Landon defined disconnected by 2 things: disconnected from God and disconnected from the people of God. And so when we were trying to plan about what we wanted to teach and what we wanted to go over, we thought, well, if the first requirement is disconnected from God, what does that mean? And why are people disconnected from God? And so we're just gonna spend 5 weeks in this series. And here's what I'd like to do. I just wanna set the table and just acknowledge where we find ourselves in the midst of the disconnected. And so I got some stats and graphics, so buckle up. So in 2001, there's a group called No Religious Affiliation. And Pew Research did a lot of research. In 2011, they came up with that 29% of the US population, about 3 out of 10 people, would qualify and consider themselves not religiously affiliated. And this term, for those that are religiously not affiliated, they've been labeled the nones. And the nones are people who describe themselves as atheists, agnostics, or nothing in particular when asked about their religious identity. These are the nones. This is one of the biggest groups in our population. And when you look at this graph, this drives the point even further home. When you look at the demographic, 29% is a lot, but when you look at the largest of the percentage, it is what they call young adults aged between 18 and 29. And in 2017, 78% believed in God, and in 2022, only 68% believed in God. That is a 10% drop in young adults believing in God in just 5 years. This is an important time. I think it's obvious to state that we are in the midst of this enormous shift in the religious climate in our country. And very soon, those are gonna overlap, and those that are labeled nones are gonna be more than those who consider themselves followers of Jesus. And I've been trying to make sense of this. And I think this is part of the problem. What do we mean when we say God? Because the prosperity gospel preacher getting off their jet plane, the Westboro Baptist picketer outside a military funeral shouting, "God hates," fill in the blank, the Hindu sacrificing a goat to Shiva, the African witch doctor sacrificing a child, an ISIS terrorist beheading a soldier, a gay singer who wins a Grammy and in his speech thanks God for a song about a one-night stand, a Catholic nun giving up a normal life to live and work among the poor. All of those people claim and acknowledge God. But clearly they have a very different idea of who God is. So what do we mean when we say God? My hypothesis, perhaps these young adults and the growing group of nones are choosing to be no religion in particular because they actually have never been introduced to who God really is. Perhaps they think they know who God is, and they've walked away from a God who's not really the God of the scriptures. And so without further ado this morning, I want to reintroduce God to you. And so for some of you, some of what I'm about to say, you have probably heard before, but many, I would assume, this might be the first time you hear God described and taught this way. And my prayer is that all of us would take our next step into knowing who this God is. So without further ado, we're gonna be in Exodus chapter 34. So if you have your Bible, get that out. It is Exodus, the second book in the Bible, and we're gonna be reading in Exodus chapter 34, starting in verse 4. What I say to students, that is big 34, little 4, and that's where we're gonna be. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Did you catch that? God has a name. God has a name. If you had to answer this question, how would you answer it? Who is God? My assumption is if I asked that question, I would get as many different answers as there are people in the room. My guess is that most of us would answer who is God by saying, he is all powerful. He's all knowing. Oh, he's omnipresent. He's everywhere. He's the creator of the universe. And all those things are true, but God does not describe himself that way. He does not describe himself with facts and information. And think about this. Think about if we did that in other areas of our life. Like if you were to ask me, who is Becca? And I were to say, the wife. 5'6", brunette, blue eyes. You would look at me like, what are you talking about? You are wild. Why? Because when you ask who is Becca, what are you really asking? What is Becca like? What does she love? What annoys her? What makes her full of passion and just makes her who she is? And so it's important that we don't just get stuck on facts and information about who God is, because when God gives us his name, he's telling us about his character. He's telling us about his character, and he's not giving us facts and information. And in this text, we get his name, the divine personal name of our God, and that is, in English, the Lord, all caps Lord. But if you look in the Hebrew, that word is Yahweh, which can be translated as I am who I am. What does that mean? That's a whole nother sermon, ask me after. But essentially he is meeting Moses and says, this is my personal name, this is who I am. I am Yahweh, I am who I am. And so here's what I want you to know. The Lord and God are not his name. Those are titles. And why is this a big deal? Like, Adam, you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Like, we always say God, we always say Lord. Why is it important that we don't acknowledge him with his titles, but we acknowledge him with his names? Because to use a name is to evoke a character. And in our age, like, names are just like what sounds good when we hear the barista call our coffee order. And like Beck and I are about to have a kid, and like thinking of a name is overwhelming. And it's like, why do you pick your name? Oh, because it sounds good, or sometimes because of its meaning. But in the scriptures, names are so important, so much so that God changes people's names, because names tell you about who someone is in their deepest part of who they are. Let's look at a few examples in the Old Testament. When we get introduced to Abram, his name quite literally means exalted father. But after God makes a promise to Abram to be the father of many nations and to bless him, he changes his name to Abraham, which quite literally means father of many nations, because he will fulfill his promise to Abraham. And then Abraham has a son, but the thing is, Abraham and his wife are really old. And so when God tells Sarah, hey, you're gonna be pregnant and you're gonna have a boy, she literally laughs at God. And so what is the son's name? Isaac, which means laughter. And then Jacob, the third generation, Jacob's name literally means heel grabber, which is a euphemism for a stealer and a cheat. And that is who Jacob ends up being. He is stealing and cheating his way through his life until the significant moment in the scriptures where he wrestles with God. And in that moment, Jacob grabs a hold of God and says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And so God says, okay, you've been known, your character, your reputation is as a liar and a cheat. I'm gonna give you a new name, Israel, which means he who struggles and wrestles with God. So this is why it is so important that we understand who God is, that he has a personal, divine name. And having a personal name tells us something about God. He is a God who wants to relate to us, to have a relationship with us. And we see this all throughout the book of Exodus, specifically when we look at the life of Moses. I want to very quickly go through 3 instances that Moses and God demonstrate that there is a personal relationship between God and Moses that is unlike any other that we'd seen up until this point. First, in Exodus 33, Moses speaks face to face with God. That is like radical and unknown in the ancient Near Eastern time. And this is what it says. When Moses went into the tent of meeting where the presence of God was, we read this in Exodus 33. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. That's a relationship. Secondly, we see that Moses has a bold relationship where he asks for crazy things. He makes his request known. And Exodus 33, he says this, if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. And God says, okay, my presence will be with you. And then Moses kind of gets more confidence. He says, oh, I'm gonna ask for something even more bold. And he asks, now show me your glory. And the Lord said, okay, I'm gonna cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. And as if this isn't radical enough, perhaps one of the most radical things that we read about the relationship that God has with Moses comes after the golden calf. The people of God quickly get distracted and they start to create a golden calf, an image of God to worship and idolize. And while Moses is on the mountain, God says, I know what my people are doing and I am angry. And these are the words that we read. God says in Exodus 32, I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. And Moses was like, whoa, okay, that's a lot. And so he goes, okay, God, how about you turn from your fierce anger? What would the other gods say about you? What about your reputation? Don't you remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self? I will make you descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then, this is crazy, the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he has threatened. Wait, so you're telling me God changed his mind? That's a whole nother sermon. I gotta keep the bowling alley, I gotta keep the bumpers up. Here's my main point in all 3 of these instances. It would seem as if there's this ebb and flow, this back and forth between God and Moses, that there quite simply is a relationship, a back and forth, a give and a take, an asking and receiving, a sharing and receiving. And here's my main point. God is a friend, not a formula. I'm gonna say it again because I think this is really important. God is a friend to know, not a formula to master. And the problem is many of us think of God as a formula, that if we can input the right things, we will produce the right result. And so maybe the formula goes a little bit something like this if you operate with God this way. Morality plus religious stuff minus sin, and that will get you God's blessing. And so if you just put in anything you want to, that could look like, okay, if I read the Bible, go to church, and I don't have sex with my girlfriend, God will bless me. And you could exchange that however you want. And here's the problem. If this is your understanding of God, I totally understand why you would walk away and not want anything to do with this God. And here's where this falls short. If you think of God and treat God and act with God as if he's a formula, the moment he doesn't deliver on the goods and services you think you're owed or think that you deserve, you bail. And so it's no surprise that 18 to 29-year-olds are leaving by the flocks because perhaps they think of God more of a formula instead of a friend, someone to have a relationship with. Too often, we think how God ought to be rather than how he actually revealed himself to be. I hear this pretty frequently. Maybe you've heard this phrase. You start to hear things like this. I could never believe in a God who blinks. As if we would never believe in God because he doesn't match our criteria and our categories and our understanding of who we think God should be, instead of receiving him and understanding him for who he really is. Okay, so you might be thinking, Adam, that's the Old Testament. What about Jesus? And Moses, really, that's kind of selfish because Moses was the only one that had access to the tent of meeting. Moses was the only one who saw the glory of the Lord. All the other Israelites, they were just like second-class citizens. What about all those other people? And so I want to go to Jesus. And here's the thing about Jesus. Jesus came to make the kind of relationship Moses had with God available to everyone. And I know we're not supposed to have agendas in 2023, especially Jesus, but Jesus has an agenda. And I want to share Jesus' agenda with you. This is from John 17. Jesus says in a prayer to his Father, I have made your name, Yahweh, known to them, and will continue to make your name known in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. What is Jesus' agenda? He wants you to have the same love the Father has for him towards you. He wants the very presence of God that he is privileged to have to be inside of you. Quite simply, Jesus wants you to have a personal relationship with a personal God that has a name. And this is what we as followers of Jesus believe. This is the God that we believe. And this is, quite frankly, one of the many options you have in the God that you want to believe and serve and order your life around. And so I want to transition, and I want to give a warning. This next part, I don't want to cause you to doubt even more. My heart is I think this will provide clarity for your path forward wherever you find yourself today. So if I asked you to describe what Christians believe, many of you would probably say, oh, Christians believe that there is only one God. Yes, which is true. And this is known as monotheism. Mono, one, theism, God. So one God, monotheism. And so underneath monotheism, you have Christianity, Islam, Judaism. Those are the religions that are monotheistic. But our modern understanding of what monotheism is different than the scriptures. So if I went to dictionary.com to look up monotheism, and it says the belief or doctrine that there is only one God. And I think the underlying assumption is that all the other gods that people claim, they're not real, they're false, they're imaginary. Yet this is a far different understanding than the ancient one that we have in scriptures. Tim Mackey from the Bible Project has a whole podcast on this. You should listen to it. I'll make his 50-minute podcast into one sentence. The ancient monotheism is the belief that there is one supreme God, creator and ruler, who has no rivals among all other gods, Yahweh, the God of Israel. So perhaps there are multiple existing gods. And here's just what I want to say, and I'm going to show my cards. I truly believe, and I think Scripture makes the case, that God is better than all the other gods. Yahweh is better than all the other gods. And if this is kind of hard to wrap your mind around, wait, there's multiple gods. I thought there was only one real God. Let me show you in Exodus what I'm talking about. So in Exodus chapter 12, when he's going against Pharaoh with the plagues, God says this, I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. And in Exodus 15, they cross the Red Sea and they're celebrating and singing praise. And the people of God say this, who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? And after witnessing God provide water from striking a rock, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, says this, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the other gods. And finally, what is the first of the 10 commandments? You shall have no other gods before me. The assumption is there are other gods, Ours is just ruler and the creator and master and better than all the other gods of the day. We even see this in the Psalms. When you look at Psalm 96, great is the Lord, the most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. Psalm 86, among the gods there is none like you, Lord. No deeds can compare to yours. And this one is radical. In Psalm 97, worship him, all you gods. Like all the other gods are supposed to worship our one true God. For you, Lord, are the most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all the other gods. So it would seem to me that there are many options in which you can give your belief and allegiance and loyalty and life to. And Scripture would make clear over and over again that our God, Yahweh, is better than all the other gods. He is more powerful, he is good, and he relates to us in different ways than all the other gods. So I want to end and land the plane by just acknowledging and speaking for a moment to those that consider themselves under the nones category. If you're an atheist, if you're agnostic, if you don't know what you want to believe, I just want to take a minute to go through your options. And so I'm going to talk about worldview. And here's your option. Option one is atheism. And atheism is quite simply disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or gods. So this is an option. You can choose to say, okay, I don't believe there's any gods. The meaning of life, just enjoy it while you can. When you die, that's it. So that's option one. You can be an atheist. Option two is polytheism. And poly means many, so this is the belief that you don't have to worship just one God. There are many gods, so you can worship any and every God depending on your circumstance. If you want rain, like we all want rain, you could pray to the God of rain, and then the next day you're like, oh, I need money, so I'm gonna pray to the God of money. Oh, my livestock is struggling, so I'm gonna pray to the God of livestock and agriculture. And this is where you just check all the boxes, you worship multiple gods at the same time, and you don't give your allegiance to one of them. You just kind of shotgun, spread, and cover all your bases. This is your second option. The third option is universalism. This one has picked up a lot of trend in recently, which is essentially why there's no one true religion, there's no one true God. All gods lead to the same pathway. All gods lead to the same mountain, and that is, so you just take your pick, whether that's Buddhism, Christianity, spiritual, not religious, all of these lead to the same final conclusion. Don't worry about which one you pick, just pick one and stick with it, and you'll be fine in the end. Fourth, your option is monotheism, which is the belief that there is one God, and these are the false gods. And so if you pick right, then you will be rewarded in heaven. But I want to submit that this is a shallow understanding of what I think is the best option as followers of Jesus. Rather than just picking one and working your way and hoping that one day you reach the top and you meet the God that you hope you want to meet, in reality, I think there's a better monotheism. And it's not all paths lead up the same mountain. Instead, there are different paths that lead up different mountains. And it's not that Jesus is the only way to God, although that is true. The good news of the gospel is that it is not just us getting to God. I think there's a better way to say that, and that is Jesus is God come to us. That Jesus is Yahweh in human flesh coming so that we could have a personal relationship with a God with a personal name, a God who is better than all the other gods. And so here's just, I just want to end this way. Do you know what Jesus' name means? We talked about Yahweh, the personal name of God, meaning I am who I am. Do you know what Jesus' name literally translates into? God saves. Tells you all you need to know about the character and nature by the name. And what is his name? God saves. So this morning, if you find yourself disconnected, you don't know what to believe, you're unsure about what belief system you want to commit to, you've heard about God, but maybe you've never heard of God in this way, I want to tell you that Jesus is better than Moses. Moses, do you know what Moses' name means? To draw out. When he was a baby in the basket, what did Pharaoh's daughter do? Drew him out of the Nile. When Moses freed the people, what did he do? He drew Israel out from Egypt. And here's just what I want you to know is Jesus is so much better than Moses. Moses drew the people out of slavery from Pharaoh. Jesus brought us into a relationship with God. Moses delivered through water. Jesus delivers us through the blood of himself. Moses led the people to a promised land, and Jesus led us to a promised reunion with God. Through Moses, God defeated the gods of Egypt, but through Jesus, God defeated sin, death, and the grave. Moses brought about temporary deliverance, and Jesus brings about permanent deliverance. And all we have to do is open our mouths. Unlike the people of God in Israel, Moses had to go up a mountain to meet with God. All we have to do is open our mouths, and we will receive him and be in his presence forever. This is my invitation to you this morning. That God has a name. God is better than all the other gods, and he desires nothing more than to have a relationship with you. And all you have to do is confess and acknowledge and enter that relationship with him.